Welcome to our webinar on celebrating LGBTQ plus families in psychiatry. My name is Joseph Villanova. I'm a consultant psychiatrist and medical director, and I am a member of the executive committee of the Rainbow Special Interest Group here at the Royal College. We had quite a lot of people interested in joining us. I believe it was more than 200 people, which is extremely good news. It's great to have you with us today as we come together to recognize a remarkable group of people, which are LGBTQ plus parents and those who have chosen to build their families through adoption. As you know, in recent years, our society has made significant strides in acknowledging the rights and identities of LGBTQ plus individuals. However, it is crucial that we focus our attention on the unique experiences, challenges, and hopefully successes faced by LGBTQ plus people who have chosen to become parents or to adopt children. As mental health professionals, we all understand the impact that the norms of our society have on us, discrimination and stigma, and how important are all these factors in the well-being of families. It doesn't matter whether they are families of psychiatrists or any other families. And it is our responsibility to explore ways to provide an inclusive, compassionate, and affirming care to ensure that everybody can receive the support they require and can have families as happy and successful as any other families. Then, through this webinar, we are going to hear from some colleagues who've gone through that experience and who can offer some first-hand experiences and insights into how difficult it is to be LGBTQ plus and start a family with children. Then hopefully all of us together will be able to engage in some thought-provoking discussions. Maybe we'll be able to share some knowledge, some experiences, and maybe discuss some paths towards how we improve mental health outcomes for any type of LGBTQ plus parent and their children. Then I need to thank our three panelists who their experience has made this webinar possible. I'm not too sure whether the second panelist will be able to join us or not due to some technical problems. If he's able to join us, we'll have three panelists, and if not, we'll have two, and we'll have to manage with fewer people. I'm sure he won't mind. Then let's start with the first one. The first one is Máire Cooney. She's not here with us in person, but she has pre-recorded her presentation. Then we won't be able to have any type of debate with her afterwards. Then we just see the presentation. Then Máire Cooney is a consultant in rehabilitation psychiatry. She works in Lanarkshire in Scotland, and she is an executive member and past chair of the Rainbow SAG at the Royal College of Psychiatrists. She is a medical member of the Mental Health Tribunal Service, and she's a designated medical practitioner with the Mental Welfare Commission for Scotland. In 2005, Máire and her partner had a civil partnership, and shortly after that, they began the process of becoming adoptive parents. They adopted two boys the following year, and they built quite a busy family unit, which includes them, the boys, rabbits, rats, cats, dogs, and a variety of animals of many different kinds. Máire will talk about the experience of being assessed and being evaluated as a potential adoptive parent to be able to pass all these type of obstacles. And the stress of being a new mother and presenting herself as fully in control of the situation while going through all these stresses, both at home and at work. And I'm sure we can now hear Máire's pre-recording.
Hello everybody, it's a pleasure to be part of this webinar and to share my story. I'm just going to use some slides to try and illustrate my talk, and I'll start with this one, which is a photograph which to me represents really the calm before the storm. It was taken by one of my boys very many years ago, somewhere up near Loch Lomond on what was an extremely difficult day for our family. But I want to go way back to 2005, where my adoption story began. So at that point, I was living in London with my partner, Winnie, playing a lot of football, and in my final year of higher training in general adult psychiatry. We'd been together, myself and Winnie, for 14 years. So by 2005, we were settled, we were happy, and we were pretty busy, the two of us. We're both from quite large families, really great families, both of them, and having our own children, despite this, wasn't really something we'd considered at all, at least not until these two pieces of legislation came along. The Adoption Children Act was the single biggest change to adoption practice in the UK in generations. It was groundbreaking. It allowed non-married couples, it allowed non-married people to jointly adopt, including same-sex couples, and including lesbian couples like myself and Winnie. So after various challenges, it came into use in 2005. And around that time, the Civil Partnership Act 2004 was just getting up and running. I'm sure you'll be aware of that act. Without these two acts, we would not have had children. The two acts, I think, were really needed for us anyway, even after 14 years, to feel safe and supported, legitimised, I suppose, as a couple and as potential parents. So we had our civil partnership in 2005, and later that year, we decided it was the right time to start thinking about having children. For us, having children always meant adoption, so that's what we started to look into. So far, so straightforward. What I haven't mentioned up until this point is the way that I had of very carefully managing my own life at that time. So this cartoon was my default mode. So to explain, I grew up near Edinburgh in a large, lovely, extended family with Irish parents, and all of that was extremely important to me. I love that cartoon. I've had a cutout of this for years, which I still keep on somewhere around about. So a huge part of my identity is Catholic, Scottish, Irish. It's always has been and it always, I think, will be extremely important to me. The music, the sport, the values, the stout. But some of that conflicted with the reality of my life. So being a lesbian was normal for me, but it was tricky. And denial was useful for a long while. It allowed me to keep my own family life back in Edinburgh and my personal life in London entirely separate. It kind of worked, although my friends who know me from that time will tell you that it did indeed not work at all. That might seem quite odd in 2023, but I think another piece of legislation is relevant to help you to understand if you don't know what things were like at that time. So this is section 28, the infamous section, clause 28 of the Local Government Act 1988. I'll just let you read part one. I've highlighted that in green there. And I think that the thing that always stood out for me was the second part there, local authorities being prohibited from promoting the teaching in schools of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. And that phrase, pretended family relationship, I'll come back to. I just started medical school in 1988, and at that time homosexuality was widely considered to be wrong. Public attitudes were of suspicion, mistrust, and sometimes worse towards gay and lesbian people. And I lived through that and of course internalised some of that, I'm sure. So being a lesbian was really not ideal, at least not in every way. During our adoption journey, excuse me, and well beyond, the phrase pretended families was always there at the back of my mind, or indeed at the very front of my mind. Back to adoption and 2006. The adoption process itself was exhausting. It was emotionally draining. In late 2005, we went to an open day, and by early spring, we'd attended the preparation course for potential adopters. In spring of 2006, we were allocated a social worker from Coram, our adoption agency, and we started the home study. That picture there, by the way, is the only one that the boys will allow me to show of them, and they're right there in the middle of the photograph, where the red arrow is. During that period in my life, everything really flooded out. My defences were smashed. That very precarious control I had was really gone, and it was I suppose dismantled for good reason. Of course, we were being assessed to see whether we could provide therapeutic parenting, so this was important. In December of 2006, we saw our first photograph of Jack and Josh, our boys, and by April 2007, we met our children for the very first time. Now, I won't show you a photograph of our boys because they won't allow me to. Even to this day, I asked them yesterday. But believe me, they were and are very handsome chaps. This will have to do. This is the first picture we saw of Jack and Josh. Well, it's not that one, obviously. Something very similar, I think, anyway. The boys were 5 and 6 at the time, and we knew immediately that we wanted to be their parents. The introductions and the panel are all a bit of a blur. It was fair, and it was comprehensive and difficult. But before we knew it, we were responsible for these 2 little boys. Being a doctor, oh God, that is a photograph of one of my boys. A bit. I'll have to explain that to him later. Being a doctor, a consultant psychiatrist, and a mum to 2 adopted boys has always been hard for me. There's really nowhere to hide. I try to keep my working life and my family life separate. It's really something I just tend to do. I show photographs of our young family. I tell the funny stories, of which there are hundreds. But I was rarely able to talk about the harder things, and there were very, very many hard things. I couldn't talk about them at work, and I couldn't talk about them with my family, perhaps with my close friends, or closest friends, particularly those I'd gone through training with. And that was really because I thought nobody had really asked us to adopt as 2 women, as a same-sex couple. And always that phrase, pretended family, was there, as I said, at the back of my mind. I sometimes felt that we were wrong for wanting to have it all. We try to do things by the book, and there are a lot of books for those of you who are familiar with adoption. We had great support from Quorum, our adoption agency, and from our families, both of our families, and from close friends. We had very little negative reaction, really, well, too few to mention. And I think a lot of the pressure actually came from ourselves. We both just wanted to get it exactly right. Being a psychiatrist and a mum to 2 adopted boys is something that I've always found hard. Our training teaches us about the challenges faced by looked after children, the consequences of neglect and traumas, the later learning difficulties, developmental delays, and attachment issues. I tried to be a mum at home and a doctor at work. But adopted children and adoptive families have a lot of medical and social needs. It was very hard to keep those things separate, and it did all at times feel as if it was becoming unpleasantly and uncomfortably blurred. I have very close friends and very good family, but I felt scrutinised, assessed, and monitored. And I think, as I said, I think that's because I felt the pressure to be doing all right, at least a lot of the time. Maybe medical training does do that, this need to know and to be in control and to have the answers. So, I think I've come to the end of my talk, actually. How are we all doing now? Well, as I said, that was 2006. Our boys are now 21 and 22 years old. They're funny, they're kind and gentle young men. They'll always have the difficulties that go with paid and care experience, of course, but they really are wonderful, and they're doing well. Myself and Winnie, we're doing fine as well, and the day job's going okay still. We've had consistent support from our close family, from friends who are parents, and from medical friends who've known us all the way through, and have been with us since our SHO days. We have support from both of our families, and all in all, it's been a wonderful journey and a great experience. I suppose time really does heal everything. We're all doing well, and we are Yes, thriving, I think it's fair to say. That's the end of my fairly short presentation. Unfortunately, I'm not able to take questions, but I do hope that was of interest to you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar, and thank you very much indeed for listening.
Can you see me now? Perfect. Well, then, we've seen Máire, who I have known for a long time. She certainly has quite a busy family with lots of animals. Quite interesting to see them. It is likely that our second panelist cannot attend due to technical problems, which is the normal difficulties of having webinars through the internet. We can move to our third, who I know also very well for a long time, Alan Mackenzie. Alan is a consultant forensic psychiatrist, also working in Glasgow. Alan is an executive member of the Rainbow Special Interest Group at the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and he's also a member of the Scottish Workforce and Careers Committee. And he is also an advisor to the Mental Health Directorate at the Scottish Government, with a particular focus on workforce. Alan has interest in medical education, workforce recruitment and retention, and combating stigma associated with mental illness. Outside of work, Alan is kept busy by his 8-year-old twins, and he finds time to enjoy running, cycling, and singing. And I can confirm that I heard him singing online, which is quite spectacular. During Alan's psychiatric training, he and his husband adopted 3-year-old twins. Alan will tell us about how he managed to balance psychiatry training with the adoption process, and he'll also tell us about some of the challenges he's faced and how he managed to overcome them. Now it's over to Alan.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all those who've taken the time out of their busy days to attend the webinar today. And I suppose one of the main things to say is Happy Pride Month. It really is a sort of pleasure to be able to talk today at this webinar. And it was only made possible by the suggestion made by a member of the Rainbow Special Interest Group to hold a session about rainbow families. So in thinking about how to approach the talk today, I actually was again reminded about the importance of pride and why we have pride. So just before I talk about my journey in the adoption process, firstly, the importance of pride is that we celebrate and affirm identities. We celebrate sexual and gender diversity, affirming our own identities and celebrating our community and championing visibility. Secondly, protest and engagement, protesting the discrimination and violence against our communities, raising awareness of issues affecting LGBTQ+ people amongst our allies and the wider community, and championing the fight for fairness and equality. Thirdly, reflection. We have to appreciate the history of the LGBTQ+ movement, and we have to be aware of the journey our communities have been on and the privileges that we now enjoy as a result of the sacrifices of others. We have to reflect upon equality and equity and the distance we still have to travel in our whole rainbow family. The correspondence that suggested this session talked about how seeing and hearing from an LGBTQ+ psychiatrist with children at a more junior stage in that person's career would have had a profound impact upon that person feeling that having a family was an option for them. So if today I can leave one person watching with a feeling that it's possible for you to have your own rainbow family, or to support others in your workplace on their journey towards this, then it will have been time well spent. Máire has in her talk reflected beautifully and bravely about the journey that she has travelled with both perceived and realised stigma. And having watched her talk, I just want to say thank you to people like Máire and likely others watching who have travelled this road, challenged that stigma, and are likely the reasons why my journey was made easier. So my adoption journey probably began in around 2014. My husband, who is an anaesthetist, and I got married in July that year, as I was finishing my second foundation year in Glasgow. At that point, we had not really considered starting a family and were both highly career driven. We had decided to apply to go to the big city and took jobs in the big institutions for what we were both really interested in. So for myself, that was taking a job on the Maudsley training programme, and for Rob, that was at St George's with a strong interest in pursuing pre-hospital care with HEMS. We spent a year in London, but we're both left with a feeling that something was ultimately missing. We decided to come home to the place that we both lived and trained in for a long time. But we did so in the knowledge that we were pursuing something different. We talked during the difficult times in London about what the future looked like. Whilst I wouldn't want to repeat all of my experiences there, I know that I learned a lot both professionally and personally about myself. Without those challenges and the conversations about what we wanted ultimately from our lives, I know we wouldn't be where we are now. After much reading on the internet, we identified an adoption agency who were LGBTQ plus friendly, as this was something that was very important to us for many of the reasons that Máire outlined in her presentation. We attended the initial information events and had a visit from 2 of the social workers to our home. The image was sort of starting to form at this point. The 2 of us, the dog, our home in the suburbs, and children, although that part was still a little fuzzy at this point. The adoption journey is challenging, but ultimately, it's so rewarding. The first step is attending preparation groups once a week for around 2 to 3 months. And these groups are designed to really highlight the reality of adoption and to challenge you. We explored our own motivations and also heard directly from adoptive parents and their children. This was probably one of the hardest bits of the process. However, in hindsight, it is this preparation that prepares you for the hard decisions and the honest truths about yourself and what you're able to deliver for a child, which is ultimately the whole point of the process. Then there was a long period of engagement with an allocated social worker, where they really are assessing your suitability to adopt. This includes some very probing questions about psychological suitability, your relationships, and your economic and social situation. This was difficult and hard. It is very intrusive, but again, in hindsight, you can see the reasons why those things have to be done and why that is the case. Thinking about my situation at the time, I was completing core psychiatry training, but for these parts of the process, it was actually quite easy to integrate with my training. I had to swap some weekend and evening on-call shifts, but beyond that, it didn't have a huge impact upon my ability to show up at work. Then, the next stage in our journey was the panels. Panels in adoption are a group decision on your suitability. So firstly, your own adoption agency decides on your suitability to adopt. And then there are subsequent panels for matching you to children or a child, and also a final matching panel for us. We were very fortunate to be approved in August 2017, only 2 years after our first initial contact with the adoption agency. Now, for many, me saying only 2 years would seem like a long time. However, the adoption process can take longer than many people would expect. I remember that August and September in 2017 very well, as I also sat my cask, which, as anyone who has gone through that process will know, is very, very daunting. Fast forward 5 months, and we were heading in a car down the M74 towards the south to go and meet the foster carers who were looking after the children that we had been matched with prospectively. However, given it was January and we were still in Scotland, this didn't quite go to plan, and we spent 7 hours stuck in snowdrifts overnight on the M74. This did not deter us, and by February 2018, we were sat in the adoption panel at the local authority, which we ultimately adopted our children from, receiving approval. I should note that at this point, we had read a lot of written information about the children, but had only seen pictures of them, very few pictures of them, and had no idea about their personalities, their quirks, and we had never met them. To say that things moved quickly then is an understatement. Nearly a month later, we travelled to the place where the twins were living, and we started our introductions. The twins, one girl and one boy, were 3.5 years old when we met them. On day one, we spent only an hour in the foster carer's house with the kids. We played, and then we left. I remember that night very clearly, as it was both overwhelming and joyous at the same time. Each subsequent day that passed, we spent more time with the kids. We started to get involved in their daily routines with meals, getting them ready and integrating into their lives. By the second week of introductions, we had mostly taken over their daily routine from the foster carers, and the kids came to stay with us in the cottage that we had hired nearby to where they lived. Every single day was some new milestone, but this one felt huge. We had full responsibility for the kids. Our connection with the kids kept building, and it was felt by all that the kids would be ready to transition to living with us by the end of the third week. Now again, at this point, I was still in core training, and to say that this was complex timing would be an understatement. I was in CT3, the third year of core training. I had applied for ST4 training in forensic psychiatry, and I had my interview at the end of March 2018. This would turn out to be exactly the same week that the kids came to live with us. Was it challenging to have both major changes to my personal life and an interview which could determine my future together? Yes. Incredibly stressful, incredibly difficult. But for me, somehow it all seemed to work. There was something bigger that was driving this forward. And the motivation to do the work, despite the difficulties, was there. I took 6 months of adoption leave from the final part of my core training, and then started my forensic training in February 2019. In many ways, I feel incredibly fortunate. Our children settled quickly, which we've subsequently been told is as a result of the preparation that we did. By 6 months, they were integrated into nursery without any issues, and it felt right for them to be in that environment with other children to help them learn and grow. This is not always the experience of everyone who goes through the adoption process, but for us, it felt like the right thing. Moving up to the present day, they're now 8. How 5 years have passed, I have absolutely no idea. I also have absolutely no idea what I would do without them in my life now. Being a parent has been so challenging at points, but it has made me a better person, and I think a better clinician. I was that classical type A personality who could see nothing but the need for rapid achievement, married to my work. Now, I feel as though I have a greater balance and an improved perspective about what is important. I'm highly passionate and driven at work. That hasn't changed. But I now know that I'm more than just the me at work. We are lucky. Being 2 men, there's never been any dubiety about the fact that neither myself nor my husband gave birth to our children. They've always known that they have 2 dads, and my daughter would vociferously correct any other child who dared to assume that this was not true. We've approached any questions they have with honesty and openness. We have dealt with the difficult topics of where babies come from and birth probably long before most other children would even consider these. We've also had to deal with negative things. We've had to deal with homophobia expressed by other children, even at the age of 5. But throughout all of this, we've been supported by initially the fantastic social workers, the teachers, our families, and our friends. And we couldn't have had such a wonderful journey without them. So that vision, which at the preparation group we were made to draw, despite my terrible artistic skills, with me, my husband, the house, the dog, and the kids, has now come to life. And it's so much more than any vision or terribly drawn picture at that time could ever have shown me. So to end, I hope that my story has been informative and given hope to anyone out there who has felt that this is not something that is open to them because of who they are or who they love. It is. Find the right people and the right support, and it can happen for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. That's been fascinating. gosh, I think we can start discussing a bit what you've said. We have the third panelist, then we don't need to spend the rest of the webinar, me and Alan. We were terrified about that. We should be able to make it short. If any of you have any questions, just write it in the Q&A box. I think we had already some questions, but we have loads. We have one from Pavan, who is our leader in our special interest group. Pavan is asking, how long did it take you between formally starting and completing the adoption, and whether that would be a similar process and a similar time frame for a straight relationship?
Yeah, so we started the process in around about August 2016, and then we adopted in March 2018, so just about 2 years. We know that we were relatively quick. That is relatively quick. But in terms of Pavan's question, it certainly for the adoption process, that would be the same irrespective of your sexual orientation. The process is the same for everyone going through it.
I just wonder, is there any type of differences in the type of children that you can adopt? I'm just wondering whether heterosexual couples have priority and then go gay couples, or whether everybody has the same priority. Is there any difference?
Certainly not for the adoption agency that we used. That did not factor into their thinking at all. We were not the only gay couple who were using the adoption agency that we went with, and actually the adoption agency that we used makes a sort of, not a big thing, but is very open about the fact that they are supportive of LGBTQ plus parents. And I think that was one of the reasons why we chose to go with them, and it clearly worked out for us. But I do think part of that again is about preparation. Know which agency you go with. There are many, and there are many different ways to go about adopting. So yeah, useful to think about those things in advance.
Perfect. We have another question here by Francis Travers. Francis is wondering whether did you feel that because you and your husband were both doctors, maybe you were held to a higher standard than other couples might have been? Were you encouraged to adopt children that had more complex needs just because you were doctors?
That is an interesting question. Potentially. I think the way in which you're assessed is fairly standard. So in terms of being held to a sort of higher standard, I don't necessarily think that would be the case. What I alluded to in the talk about being honest with yourself when you're going through, especially the home study process, and also, to be honest, as part of the preparation group, which, for want of a better way of putting it, is designed to put people off. They do emphasize the negatives when you go for the initial part of the process, but that is on purpose. You have to really want this. But in terms of the second part of your question, we were honest with ourselves. We knew that we both wanted to continue working. So we were, I guess, restricted in what we would consider as something that would be able, children that we would be able to give to. We were honest with ourselves, because if not, we would have got into a situation where that wasn't the best thing for the children, which is ultimately the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. And Abrar Hussein has a question that I was thought in asking. You know that there's going to be some degree of homophobia, and you already mentioned that, you know, the children in the school, and that's going to be a source of stress for the children and for yourself. How did you manage all these type of negative attitudes that they are going to happen?
So the incident I talked about was managed fantastically by the school. I cannot praise teachers generally enough for the way that they deal with things. I guess my general approach to it is not necessarily to, I guess, make the children adversarial towards people who have those views, but more to help the children appreciate that families look different. And that's what we've always tried to say to them. Not everyone's family looks the same. And there are many children within their class who have one parent, who have no parent, no biological parents involved in their care, who are looked after by their grandparents, who have two mums. We're lucky that we live in a relatively diverse area. So the children see those things. And rather than I guess trying to make out that the person who holds those views is necessarily wrong, which as adults we know those views are not good to be held, but it's more to help the children appreciate that everyone's families are different and they maybe come from a different perspective.
Yes, I agree, and guess that's a bit easier now than when I was your age, where situations were quite different. And keeping in that topic, we have a question from Anuya Bandekar, that she mentions that nowadays being lesbian, gay, or bisexual is more accepted in the Western world. And they wonder whether you still experience any type of homophobia in your life. What would you answer?
That also is an interesting question. I do feel, yes, I think so. And one thing I didn't actually mention in my talk, I did go less than full time as part of my training for the first 6 months after returning to training. And that just didn't work for me. And I think in part that was due to the fact that there was a degree of, I guess, oddness in a man being less than full time as a trainee. And I think the reason for that, certainly within the area that I worked at the time, I suppose it's far more normalized now. But yeah, I felt that there was this slight oddness about being the person who was less than full time, and the reason for that was because of looking after the children. I don't think it was direct sort of homophobia, so to speak, but I just think it was that sort of oddness associated with our family, ultimately our family model that we had.
You mean that if we were a woman, it would have been seen as something natural, but you being a man, it wasn't.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's not exactly homophobia, but it's an interesting distinction, and I completely understand it. We're running out of time. It's nearly 5 o'clock. Well, then I guess we can just finish for today. Thank you, everybody, for asking questions, for joining us in this webinar. Thank you to our 3 panelists who've been brave enough to talk about their private lives here in front of everybody, which is never an easy thing to do. And hopefully this webinar has helped to at least open a discussion about the difficulties that LGBTQ plus parents may face. And I guess that will be it for today. Thank you so much for attending.